Greetings and welcome to Office Hours. If you are new here and you want to learn a little bit more about what we do, head over to officehours.global. Our first hour, we answer your questions on media and virtual events. And our second hour is something that we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we've got some of the crew from the 1000th show, the Kiloshow, to talk about the nuts and bolts. But first, go ahead and submit your questions so that our panel can get to them during the first hour. And you know what, Bill? Let's get this party started.
Absolutely, Liberty. Good morning, afternoon, evening, or night to all of you. And our first one comes from Guy Cochran in Seattle. And he says, what's new in OBS version 29?
Go ahead, Alexander.
Well, the only one that I care about, which I think is actually pretty substantial, is they now have support for Apple ProRes encoders natively. I've been running the Beta 3 in a couple of productions, and it was very low CPU utilization. I have an old Intel Mac with Xeon processors, and less than 2% on average. Very stable. So for me, that was the most notable one, but it looks like they also do have support for HEVC encoders on Windows, and there's AV1 support for Intel graphics cards as well. There's a whole bunch of other stuff. The list is pretty extensive, so I would have a look at that.
How are you using OBS? That was a question that came up before, and it's interesting that this the new version. So how are you using it?
Well, I'm just using it for recording ProRes 422HQ off the ATEM Mini, so I'm not using the USB output on the switcher. So I'm taking an HDMI output of that, going into a Roland HDMI encoder just because it does fully uncompressed video. Then I go into my Mac and then I record the program output with OBS.
Nice. Guy?
Yeah, one of the things that dropped over the weekend inside of 29 was due to some of the folks that have been on the panel. We've got now the SRT passphrase and the ability to add authentication. So one of the big things that's coming, and I do have clearance, Alex, to talk about this, is that YouTube will be able to ingest SRT. And so we ran from the CES front lot with Keenan's cool disaster group bonded cellular solution. We were able to push up an SRT stream from CES, which was pretty cool to see. So it's exciting to see what's coming out with HEVC and SRT going up to YouTube. So things are looking cool, and it's not for everybody at the moment. It's still in a beta thing. Broadcasters can get it, and people that know people can get into it. So thanks for the introduction, Alex.
The insights. You always get the inside scoops here on Office Hours. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, I did get the prompt to update, and I'm showing one of the features that were listed was the Mac OS desk view. I actually don't know what that feature is, and I have not yet updated it, but it seems interesting.
Next question.
Next one comes from Paul Terry Wallace in Austin, Texas. And Paul says, anyone have any experience with a Shure SM7B coupled with a Shure MVI digital audio interface with USB and Lightning cables and 5 DSP preset modes? How does that stack up with other setups on Office Hours?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I do have experience with the Shure SM7B. That was one of the classic mics you saw in a lot of radio stations. That mic, by the way, had the foam windscreen on it, and back in the day when they used to be allowed to smoke in the studio, it was a horrible odor coming from those microphones. The MVI digital audio I do not have experience with. I did take a peek at it. I'm not a fan of membrane switches on something that requires tactile adjustment.
Alex?
Yeah, it should be fine. The MVI digital audio, to Mitchell's point, it's a little odd to have the way that the switches are. I own one of those, and it is, but it works really, really well as just a general interface. You don't have anything special in the interface. It's just bringing your XLR in, but it's very effective. I think that you'd be really in a good place with an SM7B and a digital audio interface.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he says, what preamps and or DIs or direct insert boxes would you recommend for adding saturation and character to synths?
Go ahead, Alexander.
Well, the one that I like, it's not exactly inexpensive, but it's the Radial HDI box. And that one actually has a compressor. There is a knob called color. And if you turn it up really, really hard, you will get some saturation. So I tried plugging a bass guitar into it and I got some pretty gnarly distortion out of it. So if that's kind of what you're looking for, if you're looking for a little bit of grit in your synthesizer sound, then I would give that a shot.
Mitchell?
Seems to me that I don't have experience with this, but I would suggest that an analog DI box that has an analog front end, because it's okay to overload an analog circuit, but not a digital circuit, unless it has a specific setting to recreate that effect.
Next question.
Matt Cool in Montreal, Canada says, I have 6 Shure PSM300 in-ear transmitters in a rack. They each have an external power supply unit that supplies 12 volts at 400 milliamps. Is there any issue with replacing them with a single 12 volt 3 amp power supply units and make my own cable distribution?
Courtney?
It shouldn't be too big of a problem. One thing you might be careful of is as you break out those, make sure your 12 volt power supply, it might need a little more than 3 amps to power all of them. But I would use some ferrite cores, something like these, to clip over the right as that cable enters the power through that coaxial barrel connector. Clip some of these ferrite rings onto the cables to attenuate any RF that could be leaking in from the transmitter or coming in from the switching power supply into the transmitter on each one of them, to keep them from cross-talking to each other and generating strange beat frequencies from their carrier waves.
Alexander?
I wouldn't suggest that. The way I would do it is I would get, and I'm putting a link here in Mukana, I would suggest the Shure antenna combiner design for that system, because not only do you get to combine all the antennas in a single rack mount, you have a standard single IEC on the back. So instead of, I don't like running a lot of wall warts in my racked gear. So that's the way I would do it. Cleans things up, plus you get the benefit of the antenna combiner.
And Jason?
I have one of these, and I think I'll split the difference. I don't think that there's any immediate harm to this. It may or may not interfere with the 6 separate antennas. I would just be sure to do a chassis ground on each of those units and, just very carefully ground your power supply.
Next question.
It comes from Greg Gibson in Washington, D.C., and Greg says, I need to buy a couple of displays for small venue imag, image magnification, something in the 55 to 75 inch zone. What should I look for and what should I avoid?
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, if you're on a budget, I bought the TCL from Best Buy. It's very consumer, but it's good quality imagery. It's got all of the HDMI ports in. It's very thin in profile, so it's very lightweight, so it's easy to mount up either on a wall or on a stand, which is what I've done. Found one of those mounts that you can roll around on wheels. So that would be a recommendation for a thrifty price and a good reasonable quality.
Alex?
Yeah, there's always a sweet spot where you see the price jump. So you get a whole bunch of ones that aren't very expensive, and then it arcs up, and we always kind of keep tracking what that is because it always keeps getting bigger. And right now the sweet spot is at 85 inches. So you're not saving it. You can obviously get something not that expensive, but for $1,400, $1,500, you can get a 85 inch screen for iMac. You don't really need 4K. You can get 4K if you want, but for an iMac screen, you probably don't need it. You don't need HDR. You don't need a lot of other things to put those things up. But the bigger image does make a difference. If you can get 4K, I'd get 4K just so that you have finer detail. But usually in an iMac situation, you're far enough away that it won't make that much of a difference for what you're doing. You can rarely get a screen that's too big. So for iMac, even in a small environment, an 85 inch will make a big difference unless it's a really long room and it's going to encroach on what you're doing. But if you have the room for an 85, I would definitely get one.
Courtney?
Yeah, I agree with Alex. The sweet spot used to be 55, but I just was in Target looking at some of their entry level store branded brands of 4Ks, and the 75s are now under about $700. So that's a good spot, a 75 inch. And you got to realize to set these things up, they're going to require 2 people once you get above about 55 inches because of the weight of them and putting them up on stands. So you need a person on each side of it to mount it. when you're mounting it. So take that into consideration if you're, low on personnel to set these up.
And Alex.
Yeah, this is a good time to buy monitors. So usually after Christmas, the second best time to get it is after the Super Bowl. So in the United States is to buy, because everyone now has to get rid of whatever they didn't sell for that period of time. Also think about whether you can build or buy a case. What we did is, for the larger monitors that we had, we actually built cases and we built you can buy the motor assembly separately, and then you can install it in the case and literally have it just raise out of the case. You then you can then drape it underneath it over the case that's there. We literally had Velcro on the outside of the case, so you just literally just stick it to it, and it just it displays nicely, and it just sticks out. If you can do that, if you're going to attach it to something, think hard about getting what's called a French cleat, and that is it's just a bar that goes across with a hook. There's a lot of other ways to attach your monitors, but those, to Courtney's description, when you want to lift it up there, you want it to be as simple an assembly as possible, and that one is built for this kind of thing. Think about also just really think about how you're going to mount it. Getting the TV will be easy. Figuring out what to do with it, if you have to take it up, put it up and take it down, it's going to be a big engineering process.
And Mitchell.
A little tip, and I see this all the time, and it makes me cry. When you're shipping it home or taking it home, do not lay the flat panel flat on your pickup truck or whatever device you're using. You will be very surprised when you get home and it's cracked. So lay it on its side.
Get it delivered, because then it's usually, if it's even broken when it gets there, it's somebody else's fault.
Probably the most important tip of that question. Go ahead, Sky.
Yes, and keep your tables away from it, because when you hear that ping sound and you get that nice kick right up through the glass, it's a painful experience. But ask me how I know.
I'm just going to pull this in. Greg just said in the comments, what about digital signage display versus a regular TV?
What I would say there is that the digital signage display oftentimes have a couple more they have a couple more tools to let you go 9:16 than 16:9. So they have a couple things that are there to do it. The screen will last longer. So one of the things about what you don't want to do is get an OLED. Definitely for any of these things, because the kind of things you're putting up there could stay up there for a lot longer. Digital signage screens tend to be a little bit more hardy when it comes to leaving something up for a very, very long time on them. They're kind of built towards that, and they tend to be a little bit more expensive. And they tend to be a little bit more rugged. So as a digital signage, if you think people are going to interact with it, if you think you're going to leave up the same thing for days, if you think that you may lean towards that, but most of us find that it's cheaper just to buy more monitors than it is to buy digital signage monitors. They're usually enough more expensive for the size that it's easier just to use one until we use it up and then use another one.
And Mitchell.
Game mode on a lot of the consumer level units will work best for you. And also look for some that have a orbiting pixel. What they do is that they take the image and they just ever so slightly orbit the pixels so they don't cause the burn-in. Kind of works.
Next question.
Clive Kitchener in Souk, British Columbia, Canada says, looking for a replacement for TweetDeck. I've been using Tweeten, but there are a few annoying glitches.
John?
I just want to say, because I use TweetDeck as my main interface for Twitter, tweetdeck.twitter.com. It's fantastic. I've been using it for years.
Next question.
Alexander Knight here on the panel, Vancouver, British Columbia, says, I'm installing a new HDMI 4x4 matrix today from TESMart, TESMART. Specs look good. It's rack mountable. It has a web interface for configuration. Has anybody tested this? And he's got a link there to another device.
Go ahead, Alex.
I haven't tested that one. I'm using the Blackbird 8x8 in my system. The one thing that I will say is that what really made a difference was on that web interface to either hard, say what the EDID is and give it a hard definition, or attach it to a monitor from a computer, lock that, copy and lock it. The biggest problem I had with the Matrix was not getting in there into that web interface and really defining what those are. You just ended up with a lot of your computers not being able to do it because they're asking it what it wants and it's asking them what they want, and it just ends up as black.
Next question.
Paul Terry Wallace in Austin, Texas asks a simple question, but has a deep answer. What is a showrunner?
Go ahead, Jesse.
I wish it were a simple question. I'm going to answer this question in relation to the feature film industry because I think people are more familiar with the terms in that arena. So if you think of a feature film and you think of the director, their job is to apply their unique creative vision to the whole project. When you think of episodic television, the director's job is a little bit different, and their job is to unify the creative vision across multiple episodes in one season. The showrunner is the umbrella director for all creative decisions on an episodic television show to make sure that the writing stays consistent, the visual style stays consistent across a season. It's a very, very high level position, and it usually comes with the credit of producer or executive producer or possibly head writer.
Brian?
Yeah, the showrunner is associated with TV production, and it's especially with America, less so in Britain. And it's basically the creative, but also the managerial role as well. And they're really responsible for running the show and making sure that the show gets delivered. Normally, they're coming out of being a head writer as well. And so they're also associated with the writer's room, even though they might not be writing themselves.
What would it be? What's the equivalent in Britain or that side of the world?
Executive producer. Although I guess a lot of those roles are now being taken by people who might have been adding financial interest into the production. So the showrunner really wanted to separate themselves from those other titles.
Copy that. Thank you. Sky.
All of what's been said, both the creative and the economics of a project or a product. In this case, I'm most familiar with it in the television industry because you will have a much shorter time frame to create a television show than you will a feature film. And so that's why you need that consistent vision of what are the characters, who are they, and how are they, interacting with each other. But then the directors, take that show for like 8 weeks, get that TV show done, while another director is taking the next episode and getting it already prepped and ready. So you need a consistency, and that's what often a showrunner will do.
Courtney?
Yeah, it's been pretty well covered there. I think Jesse got most of it. For episodic television, they're really showrunners really in charge of sometimes hiring the writers and head writers and for keeping the story arc consistent over the run of the show as you go between directors and writers and different episodes.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I think sometimes that it takes an army of people to put together any kind of massive program like this. So essentially the showrunner, in my thinking, is the general. Doesn't mean there's no supervision over the top of general. You have the Joint Chiefs of Staff and or the president of the country or something like that. But the general, the field general is in charge of everything that happens regarding prosecuting the effort to make the program.
And Alex.
Yeah, and I don't think that there is quite the same thing in film as there is in TV. The showrunner really has far more creative and producer role. I mean, it's a far more creative and logistic position, both. Those are mixed much more as the showrunner than what you see on a typical film, because as it's been stated before, they have to maintain an arc over multiple episodes, multiple seasons. And so really most shows rise and fall on the showrunner of how they're able to staff, how they're able to put it together, whether it actually gets done at the level that it needs to. So it's in many ways, especially as we move into more episodic content, the showrunners have become very, very powerful in Hollywood. Shonda Rhimes is a good example of one that is, signing some pretty big deals. But a lot of other ones, they become bigger than most producers would be in film, or that's what's happening right now. So it's a really interesting time to be a showrunner.
Next question.
Richard Lavery in Belfast is up next. We're getting a ground hum from our Mac Mini M1 to our desk using mini jack to RCA cable. Any options for eliminating this easily?
Alexander?
Well, you didn't mention how long of a cable you're using, so I'm going to assume you're using a relatively short cable under 10 feet, and I'm going to assume that you've tested the cable. There's nothing wrong with the ground on or the shield on that cable. So assuming that, What I would suggest doing is get yourself a DI box and convert that immediately to a balanced signal. So I'm putting a link here in Mukana, but the Radial Pro AV1 stereo DI is a good converter box. So that's what I would do and see if you still have the problem.
Jason?
Mac Minis are notorious for this for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is that there's only 2 pins. You don't have that center third ground. The way that I fixed this is first get your DAC outside of the device. So, get an external sound card, even if it's a little bit of a cheap one. And then IFI makes a product called the iDefender. And this is the USB ground loop eliminator. They make it in USB-C, USB-A. You can actually add separate and cleaned power to this device. I'll put the link in Mukana. I've used many of these over the years, and they really clean the studio up.
Mitchell?
Richard, let's first look at why you have a ground loop. It means you have a problem with your power going to your Mac Mini. It's using that headphone jack to establish a ground, and that's not really the best path because that's what causes that hum. The best way to get rid of it is quickly just try plugging your Mac in to the same outlet that the device that the mini jack plugs into. Chances are, if it's a 3-prong plug, it's going to find a better ground via that route and eliminate the problem. And as was mentioned earlier, a DI will work well. All that you really need is a high-quality transformer that's going to block that that power continuing on to the other input on the other device.
Alex?
15 years since I've used a headphone output from a computer for audio. It is, and that was when I bought my first USB Pre 2. And I realized that I don't have to think about anything about grounds. I don't have to figure it all out. I just had an output. You don't have to spend as much money as a USB Pre 2. There's plenty of USB to balanced outputs that you can get that are a lot less expensive, under $200, even under $100. But I will say that everyone can do what they want, but I never, ever, never, ever use an unbalanced signal coming out of a computer, ever. Because you get into a production and suddenly someone adds something to the system and you have a ground loop and now you're chasing everything around, where all you need is a USB to a balanced output, whether it's, there's lots and lots and lots of interfaces that will do this. And you put that in and that never happens. And it's just, and the first thing I do if I'm in a production and I hear a ground loop, I just start looking for laptops and looking for DI boxes and looking for headphone jacks. I just walk down the line and I always find someone that's got Playback Pro or some QLab or something, and they have a little headphone jack, and I'm just pull it out and it all goes away.
And Courtney?
Yeah, I agree with Alex. Try not to use unbalanced outputs out of any computer. In worst case situation, you can just make sure, as was mentioned earlier, that both devices that you're running the audio between are plugged into the same outlet and have a good grounded cable on one of them at least. Unfortunately, the Mac has a 2-pin input for power. So you might try running a ground wire, attaching it to the case somewhere, metal area on the case to ground, which is the ground pin on one of the cables. That might help, but otherwise, use an A to D converter and go digital between the two.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from TJ Asher in Minneapolis. And TJ asks, for those who do voiceover work, are there any tips or tricks for keeping your voice clean before a performance? Do you avoid certain foods or drinks?
Mitchell?
I was going to show you some of them, but I think that I'd be yelled at, so I won't gargle or do other nasty things. The best thing you can do for your voice is treat it well. And if you're going to do a bunch of vocal readings, do some exercises, vocalizations, so it loosens things up. And then the things you don't want to have a bakery item like a donut because it's going to make your lips smack and make all kinds of weird noises, or dairy. Dairy is bad. If you just need something quickly, not cold water, but just tepid water or something that's near room temperature. And if you want a great liquid tea, hot tea with honey in it, will do your vocal cords wonderful things.
Sky?
Yes, I don't have much to add to that. I've also heard lemon in that honey, lemon to help the acid will help you go, but also the vocal exercises and again, the stretching. of your mouth and your lips and your teeth and your tongue to keep everything, get your articulators warmed up. Next.
Jesse.
Thank you. Half of your time recording, or half of your time spent recording a voiceover should be spent warming up and cooling down. Avoid dairy and stick close to hot honey, lemon water, especially during the cool down to just help soothe everything over.
Cool down. I've never heard that. What happens in the cool down?
It's a lot like the warm up, but you just spend some time after the recording letting your vocal cords relax, but similar exercises to the warm up.
Nice. Bill?
All these things are useful if you're doing it occasionally. If you're doing it professionally, you're going to be reading aloud every single day for a significant amount of time. I would recommend 10 to 15 minutes a day consistently every day, unless your voice is stressed and you need to rest it. And if you're doing that like a runner, you can walk into a booth with no warm up and do your job. So the question is, how seriously do you want to take this thing? Keep your voice in top shape by using it every single day, and you should be able to walk in with no warm-up. If you're off for a month, you definitely have to use some of these techniques to get yourself back in shape.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, when I used to do a lot of voiceovers, I would not drink any dairy, like at all. I made sure I had enough room temperature water. Don't ever use cold water. It actually tightens up your vocal cords. And finally, the stage trick that I use that before every single voiceover is I put a cork in my mouth and I count. I go 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or I stick my tongue out, which I won't do on the show. And I do it if I don't have the cork as far out as I can, and then do those things. And what it'll do is it'll open up how much your mouth opens and shuts. And you just have much better diction for a small amount of time, like right before you read it. And then other than that, I almost do all my voiceovers before 10 a.m. like this, because that's when it's usually the loosest.
And Courtney?
Yeah, here's Alex right before he starts his voiceover. It's the cork comes out. Alex said is something important is your vocal cords are loosest when they're most relaxed, and that would be first thing in the morning. But if you're trying to do voices of, hey, excited teenagers, you want to drink a lot of Red Bulls in the afternoon to get it up. And so I avoid caffeine if you're doing a more authoritative voice. If you're not doing excited teenagers, hey, let's go over there. Yeah.
And Jesse.
And if you are planning to do this long term, definitely get a vocal coach to teach you what proper warm-ups and cool-downs are and how to not do damage to your voice. Because if you are recording for 3-4 hours a day over a long period of time, you can be doing long-term damage that you're not even aware of until it's too late. So consider getting a coach to walk you through the steps.
Mitchell, real quick.
I would consider the morning thing, but I find that's because I have phlegm and my vocal cords are loosest, and they change over time. So I'm only good for about 10 minutes of reading, and then it's back to my normal squeaky voice. So be careful out there.
Next question.
Jonas Dattel in Stuttgart, Germany says, what functions would you like to use your Elgato Streamdeck Plus knobs for?
Brian?
Yeah, so this is something that's competing with Loupedeck, but being able to have knobs and buttons at the same time too gives you great access in a graphics program like Photoshop. So if you're doing XY axis, if you're wanting to get really granular control, being able to have a knob to be able to control that would be fantastic.
Alex?
Yeah, I'm playing with mine in Logic, and of course, it's just being able to do things like control volumes and control sliders. Specific to editing. I'm mostly editing a podcast in it. So mostly I'm literally trying to tie all the buttons and all the dials to the buttons. I really only use probably 8 buttons and 4 dials worth of things to do what I'm doing. So I'm trying to kind of tie each one of those to that. But I think volume is probably the most obvious one in most environments there. And then specific sliders there. The other thing that I'm experimenting with is some of the values in Resolve for color correction and so on and so forth, of being able to just kind of grab those things and change the basics of what I may want to grab onto. So those are the things that I've been focusing on the most.
Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana is up next. He says, for those that attended CES, any cool things in the remote power space?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, at CES, it was kind of a theme. I think that a lot of people are looking after brownouts or blackouts, or just wanting to have something to power their fridge, or go out and do these expedition type things. For us, production people, I've seen Goal Zero, Jackery, some of these guys using these kind of lunchbox looking power supplies, and there was a lot of them at the show. When Keenan and I did our little experiment for SRT to YouTube out in the field, he has this really cool Jeep. These are my laptops down here. One was running OBS, and that's how we were pushing SRT up via this cellular modem. But you could see the Geniverse portable power supply. So the cool thing about it is it's got a USB C that's DC, so you're not going through that 120 conversion, and that was cool to see. The other ones that were in, let me back up so you could see like some of the bigger ones that they came out with at the show. So in their booth, I know Chris Widener particularly was looking for something that could handle an RV. So this stack of these two, these aren't light though, these are like 60 pounds of whack, and then if you hook them together, there's a way to get that higher amp to power RV type devices. So again, this is Geniverse. They had a bunch of times that show how long it would take, and then they to deplete one of these. So basically on there, we had a blender in the booth, and we're sitting there pushing the blend button like over and over again to see what the screen would do. So being able, I had this happen recently where the power went out here in our house for 3 days, and I lost 3 fridges of food, over $1,000 of food. So me getting one of these is important, so that next time the power goes out, we can at least last a couple of days. And with the solar charging option, you can, even without any power, you can charge them back up. Hey, there's Jeffrey Powers. Jeffrey Powers and Keenan stopped by in the booth, and they have this like pergola where you can put like if you don't own the house, maybe or renting, you could put power in these pergolas and then be able to take it with you. So that was pretty neat to see. What else did they have? That was just really cool. I mean, for those of you who've been without power, I mean, you know what it's like. But yeah, the Geniverse stuff is really interesting. I'd say that O2 is the new one that's out with the LED readout that tells you how many amps you're pulling, how much time you have left. It's really nice to have the screen. And so these guys have Keenan and the guys have been testing these things, and I'm anxious to get one so I can test all our aperture lights, because we have a bunch of aperture lights in our showroom, and I'm gonna get one of these and do a test to see how long the aperture will run on one of these O2s for rental houses and whatnot. But that was really exciting to see at CES. So that's what's there.
Thanks, Guy. Mitchell.
Guy, on that shot of Keenan's vehicle, who made that beautiful wooden stand that was in there? I'm sorry, it's a
I was eyeing that too.
It's very nice.
The wood, let's scroll back down to that if you guys don't mind. This right here is made by our very own Chris Fenwick. So,
of course.
Yeah, there's a couple tall makers in there, and you can pull them out. Keenan had all this coffee stuff in there, which was pretty neat because I needed some water, and he had this water thing that was for coffee. So that's his disaster group modem that had the 3 SIMs. I believe it was AT&T, Verizon, and one more. We had a web presenter. So his solution, this is Keenan's bag, where he's able to push right into the web presenter and power all this stuff pretty easily because it's so lightweight. And then it was just HDMI in from his camera. So we had, and that's his rig. I mean, it's so cool. He made me want one. I'm now looking at that. They had a hybrid Jeep there too. So the modern version, or this is a modern car, but the new version, the 2023 version of the Jeep now is a hybrid. So you have 40 miles of plug-in power, and then it's a gas one as well. So that's the new Jeep Wrangler HE, which we got to sit in as well. Let me see if there's a better shot.
Is there a TweetDeck next to that web presenter?
I don't think so. I think that was, I'm not sure what that was.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that was.
This is looking like a second hour to me.
It is. It is. Thank you, Guy.
Yeah.
Next question.
Next question comes from Liberty White in Toronto, Ontario. For those with iPads, how do you use them in your creative production or productivity workflow?
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, initially we were using it as our teleprompter for our Mad in the Kitchen experience, and it was able to be connected to a iPhone remotely, and then was be able to control remotely. in a teleprompter situation. But more recently, I'm also really excited about Resolve being able to be used on the iPad. And so you've got some more flexibility of at least doing some decision making. I don't know if I'd want to edit my fingers on an 11-inch screen, but there's an opportunity now.
Mitchell?
I recently bought this iPad Pro real cheap on Amazon, and I use it for my mix effect.
All right. Bill?
So I use mine on location a good little bit. I have it in kind of a hard case with a strap on the back, so it's really easy to take out. And most often when I'm shooting, particularly if I'm shooting with an iPad on a monopod, the ability to airdrop the signal or sync the signal back up with the iPad means that I have a remote monitor that I can use on location to see what my phone is seeing. And it's really useful to get high angles, low angles, and put your monopod mounted phone somewhere unusual for a nice look.
Go ahead, Jesse.
I use it a lot as a distraction-free writing tool. Of course, you need to have a keyboard. I cannot write on the on-screen keyboard. But when we're doing live streams, we always load the world clock app up on a giant monitor so everybody can see what time it is everywhere that they're broadcasting. And if we're working with a band that has fans in a certain city, we highlight that clock above the other ones so that we can keep an eye on exactly when it is, where their international fans are.
Alex?
Yeah, my primary use for my iPad is creative, like brainstorming. So that can be opening up notes and typing into it where I just feel like it's light. I'm not tempted to do a lot of the things I would do on my laptop. I am fairly focused. Also, I do all of my storyboarding, all of my keynote planning, everything else on my iPad. So, and I specifically have an iPad. I have an older iPad for building my keynotes. And the reason I do that is because I went ahead and put the matte, it's a matte finish that has the surface that feels like a piece of paper. And because of that little bit of drag really makes it feel like you're writing on paper, and it's just much nicer when I'm sketching. So when I'm sketching ideas, so that one I don't use for a lot of other things, like an older iPad Pro that I put it on. And so it's still very versatile, but I can just sit there and sketch things out. And I like that a lot. I also use it for a mix effect. And then for clocks, like Jesse, I put clocks up. I use one called Atomic Clock. And you want to look at the pictures. It's one with the BBC like dots around it. And we oftentimes mount those up pretty high because you can see it from a distance and you know that it is a pretty good version of the truth. Just make sure that you don't borrow one of your kids' iPads for that use and they have big pictures of cats on it when it goes to sleep. It's not embarrassing at all when it pops up in a large corporate event.
Right. John?
iPad is a terrific control surface. And so I use it for soundboard. I use it for DMX light control. And I use it for, there's a pretty decent app for controlling the HyperDecks remotely.
Nice. Jason?
Yeah, plus one on atomic clocks. It also works on the iPhone and actually on the Apple Watch, believe it or not. And it is perfectly in sync. And most recently, I believe you can set the NTP server that it's using, which is very, very, very handy because even if it's wrong in exactly the same way, which is exactly what you want when it comes to a clock. At current count, I have 2,563 notes in my Apple Notes. Alex is probably going to beat me by a mile, but
you're just getting started.
Oh yeah. See, this is what happens when I say, "Oh boy, am I getting old?" and somebody goes, "Ah, you're a kid." But yeah, I use anytime I'm in production, I have a really nice vise that just holds the iPad there, and I use Notes almost exclusively. And by the way, you don't actually need a special keyboard or even an iOS keyboard. You can pair any Bluetooth keyboard immediately to it. For the iPad Pro, of course, also the USB-C is class compliant. So plug it in and you're done.
Courtney?
Yeah, anything that has a web control for it, web-based like mixers or switchers or routers, web control interface, it's handy to have portable ones. I have one for my DJI Mini Probe is the primary interface for that I use for flying the DJI. And I have a Windows 8-inch tablet that I'm running a touch version of Unity on for my comms separately. So if my main computer goes down, a separate computer is right there running comms, and I can still communicate back with the back end here, telling them I'm going to be straightening out my main computer.
And Sky?
I was just talking with Guy the other day, and he introduced me to a new tool to allow an iPad to become a monitor. And I'm just thinking how flexible that could be, but I haven't had a chance to really exercise it. But what was the name of that tool and software and connection, but also a cage to hold it and mount it? So yeah, there it is.
That was something that was released at CES as well. Was Accsoon has this little device called the SeeMo, and it comes with the cable to allow you to turn your iPad into an HDMI monitor, and it'll do HDR as well as things like focus peaking. So if you have that gorgeous 12.9 or whatever size monitor you're carrying, this thing can mount on the new stand that they came out with. So you can put it at an angle and then have the MP batteries to charge it, as well as with the cage, you have the ability to have quarter 20 things all around it.
Yes, Guy, I am right there with you. I asked this question because I realized I have highly underutilizing my iPad, and I just set up the second screen, and some of my friends were laughing at me. So I was like, yeah, everyone here is using it in a different capacity outside of, like, I use it for brainstorming and always notes, and it's great for dropping, having all photos and dropping it in different ways. But I am going to start using it more so, or I have started using it more so with editing as well. So I was like, let's get all this brain trust. So thank you. I have like a curriculum now of just how I'm going to start using my iPad. Mitchell?
Yeah, to Sky's point, I use Monitor Plus to control my Sony cameras with the the iPad, because it's just an easy way, and it's got a monitor built into it. So you can walk around while your DP's pointing the camera.
Awesome. And Bill?
Liberty, tied to your computer or your laptop with Sidecar and just a cable, it makes a great second monitor if you need a little more screen real estate.
Sidecar, that is the name. Thank you. That's what I was trying to remember. Yes, Sidecar, I finally set that up, and it's been awesome. So if you ever see me looking down, just know the iPad is working very well. Next question.
Next one comes from Jonas Dattel in Stuttgart, Germany. And Jonas says, any new cool cameras released at CES?
Guy?
We saw the FR7 was there in the Sony booth. That's one to see in person was pretty cool. I was hoping to see the Panasonic UE160 there, so I could see how the motors, because they have something called direct drive on those ones, and I wanted to see the action, but they didn't have that one there because that's a new one. And they did have the Lumix S5 II and the S5 IIX. Those are really exciting because they have phase detect autofocus. It was neat to see how it wasn't making mistakes. I mean, if you've used Panasonic cameras in the past, it wasn't very good. So their new autofocus is on par and, quote, if not better than Sony's. So I for them to say that, I probably should have recorded them, because that's a bold statement, but it was doing it in the booth. I got to hold it and play with it, and that's a really nice camera. The other thing that was super impressive besides that one was this one here that'll be out later. We spent some time in the PTZ Optics booth because we just went on a whole nother tangent. It looks like any other PTZ camera, but the exciting thing about this one is what's going to happen in the future. So we've seen a lot of cameras that will auto track, but they were showing how you could pick a specific person. And then the more I talked to Paul, he let the word out that it's actually using computer vision. So this is a term that was a theme at the show. And I've seen it in the past in 2020 when we went there. There was a lot of computer vision stuff. You can use computer vision for counting people. You can use it for things like seeing if a package it has got a dent in it or a tear, like in this example. And this is happening super fast. Like if you have the right processor in there, this stuff is happening like many times a millisecond. It's just scanning. And the police use this all the time for, if you notice that they have cameras all around it and they're grabbing license plates. So this is something that's built into the new PTZ Optics, where this stuff, to see it in real time, I should have shot some videos to show you guys, but you can go online and just search for computer vision and you'll see what I mean. But that was an exciting thing at the show. So the PTZ Optics Move, it's not shipping yet. That's one that was for our industry. One thing that was exciting that I saw, where I just was like, oh my gosh, there's limitless possibilities in the future with these cameras.
Nice. Next question.
Marcello Moyano of New Jersey up next with, what's the best way to detect and fix packet loss without calling your ISP?
Alex?
Well, the first thing, of course, is to find a way to measure it and just see what you're looking at there. We mostly, our routers do that. So if you buy a more expensive router, it's going to tell you a lot about what's going in and out. I mean, obviously, there's some very large, very complicated service provider level measurement that you can get. It's probably not what you want to use in your house, but a Ubiquiti router or a Meraki router, which is what we use, will give you a lot of back-end information about what's going in and out. You obviously want to reduce anything that's going between you and the ISP, and then once you've measured it, the only thing to do is to restart your modem, make sure that your modem is up to date, make sure that your router's up to date, and then after that, call your provider.
Courtney?
There is online tools, of course, you can go. There's one called Packet Loss Test that you can just start the test on your ISP, and it sends and receives packets and measures the number of packets lost, and it takes about 10 seconds to run the test. And let's see how I did. And we scroll down. Let's see. 0%. So pretty good, huh? No packet loss. PacketLossTest.com.
And Jason?
Before you think you need to get an extremely expensive router, Alex mentioned it, but the Dream Machine Pro from Ubiquiti does this in real time, and it has to do with the way that it can, in real time, identify and tag traffic transparently. $379, and it is running continuously live and in real time.
Next question.
Jonas Dottel is back from Stuttgart, Germany, with what surprised you most at CES?
Alex?
I think the Sony getting into cars, figuring out how they're going to do that was a surprise. I don't know if it's a good surprise yet or not. I don't know how successful it'll be, but Sony's foray into getting part of cars was an interesting move.
Guy?
Yeah, there was a couple of themes really that we saw there. One we talked about earlier was the portable power and people concerned about whole home power. The other thing was autonomous vehicles, which was, again, a theme in 2020. This year, seeing a monster, I mean, like the size of a house, Caterpillar truck being remotely controlled. Talk about work from home. These guys were moving from the show floor, 1,300 miles away. Anybody could jump in that seat and control that thing and move dirt around. They set up 2 locations where you could control a dozer or a big old crane. So people were scooping up dirt right there on the show floor that was hundreds of miles away. It was super cool. The other theme, I would say, work from home. There was a lot of webcams, but we did see the Ozbot there. That impressed me. It does have a similar picture quality to the Link 360. Other webcams, I was like, man, you guys just need an Insta360. You need to start putting in half-inch chips. A lot of microphones, a lot of for conference rooms and things like that. Those weren't super impressive. But one of the other things that I liked was this hologram. So this thing looks just like a table, but it's actually like Minority Report, where you start to see things and they're not really there. Like I'm pushing this button and it's in thin air. And so that was really another thing that was like, what are the use cases? So for like COVID stuff, if you don't want to touch things that other people are touching, you're just touching air. So this was super impressive to see this in real life, where it's the future. I mean, being able to just touch things that aren't really there is just out of this world. So yeah, those are a couple of the things that were really cool, really shocking.
And Alex?
Yeah, I can't remember what I was talking about. I was so into what Guy was showing, I lost
the minority part. I was just like,
exactly.
The Minority Report.
Like,
ooh, it's sooner than later. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Morgan Price. And Morgan says, anyone have thoughts on the Sigma 1835 1.8 art lens on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K cameras? I've not heard a lot here for Zoom type setups.
Sky?
Well, my opinion is I love that lens. But I bought it for a specific purpose of being portable for shooting a film in 4K and putting it originally on my Pocket Cinema 4K, which I did have to buy the adapter for, which was almost as expensive as the lens. But it gives great bokeh. It gives me flexibility. It's very durable. And then I was able to attach it directly onto my 6K camera. But I don't use either of those cameras for a zoom experience, I stick with my Brio here. So as a cinema lens, art lens, it's awesome.
Alex?
Yeah, we've tested the 16 to 35 Canon lens, and the problem wasn't so much anything about the lens; it was the focal length. So you're going to find that you're not going to go to 18. You're not going to go past 24. So when you go wide, and so you're better off with. I strongly recommend a 24 to 70. We bought like 10 of them because you're not going out to 18, and so if you're not going to go past 24, you might as well get a 24 to 70. It gives you a lot more focal length to work with, and you find that you are usually somewhere between 35 and 60 is kind of the area that you're going to be living inside of for a zoom experience when you're talking to folks. I'm at about 50 right now. In my last setup, I was at 35, but 35 was the end of the 16 to 35 lens. So you have a lot more flexibility if specifically you're using it as a zoom webcam kind of setup. Outside of that, it's an incredible lens. And so if you're going to use it for other things, then it makes sense.
Jason?
I'm going to offer some macro advice for lenses. It is logarithmically harder. If you bought this and plan on shooting it wide open, it becomes logarithmically more challenging to have a larger aperture, meaning a smaller number, and having the same level of clarity and focus and sharpness in that lens as you have, a zoom. That's one of the reasons that prime lenses are traditionally used when you have generally anything before or after 2.8, 2.4, something like that. That said, the lens looks great.
Bill?
Yeah, I'm right now on a Canon 1635, and it's a 2.8 lens. So to Jason's point, I think it might be a little bit sharper. But for me, the choice was this. I already have 24 to 70 covered and 70 up to 200. Getting a wider lens just added more capability for me to do landscapes and other things when I want to pull this out of this rig and go out into the field. So I was buying for capability I didn't have before and adding it on the bottom end. And I also found I could use it for office hours, and it works really well for me. So everybody has different needs. That was my thinking.
And Jesse?
I love the lens. I use it all the time. For the price, it really can't be beat. If you are moving from a micro four thirds system to a Super 35 system, 18 to 35 might sound like it's a pretty broad range, but what you'll find is that 18 to 35 on Super 35 or full frame is very zoomed out, even at 35. And like Alex said, you should consider something that can zoom in even more. That said, we shoot on that lens all the time, and I really, really like it.
Next question.
Greg Gibson, Washington, D.C. I'm looking for a data carrier solution for my Pepwave router for bonded cellular. Any recommendations for a provider with unlimited data, less than $10 per gigabyte?
Go ahead, John.
Greg, hit up Keenan in Discord. He's got a solution.
Next question.
Next question comes from Morgan Price in Victoria, British Columbia. For a two-host show like a video podcast or news show, if you had the choice, would you do this in person on one set or remotely through something like Riverside or SquadCast? And what's your rationale for each?
Go ahead, Alex.
It depends. If the environment is if both of their environments are great and they've got good mics, I think it's better to let them just go ahead and do it over the internet. You want to double end somehow, so you want to have the device to be able to double end at Riverside. Of course, let you do that. Remember that Zoom has already announced that they're going to do it too. So we're going to be able to do this sometime this year. We'll be able to switch over to that. SquadCast, I believe, is only audio, so it depends on what you're trying to do for the podcast. If you need an audio element to it. But those would be the things. If they have great environments, it's really cool to see them in their own environment. It is more logistically complicated to put them in the same room. But if they don't have great places to do it or good internet, or you can't double end, then you want to put them in the same room.
Jesse?
If all things aren't equal, if they're coming in through a phone call, don't even bother. Bring them into your studio. I won't make it more than 1-2 minutes in a podcast if it's a phone call. There's no way audiences are signing up for another hour-long, poor-quality Zoom chat at their recreational time. And that said, I'm going to push back a little bit, Alex. When I listen to podcasts, within 5 minutes, you can tell if they're in the same room because there's a different energy between the host and the guest if they're in the same room than if they're coming in through Zoom call. I understand that it's not always feasible, and you might be able to get some guests that you couldn't otherwise get if you're able to do it through a Zoom call, but the energy level just drops, and it wanes so much over the course of an episode unless they're face-to-face and able to make eye contact and really feel the energy of each other.
Next question.
Go ahead.
Go.
Jeff Cohen in Miami Beach, Florida says, are there any standards for tripod camera quick release plates, or at least a de facto standard?
Sky?
Oh, I so wish there were. But the way I solved that problem was I just stuck with this inside the Manfrotto, family, and then had multiples of those plates, because somehow you'll misplace them, you'll leave them on a different camera, and you'll get out in the field and not have something to mount. But I so wanted Benro to have that same, but no, it's a different mounting bracket. So Manfrotto.
Dave?
So back in the 90s, I shot with one of these, and this is a standard definition, very expensive camera, and it's a monster, and it's heavy, and it used a plate like this, which allowed you to mount it on a number of different tripods. I used a Miller head with sticks. Up here in Canada, we use wood because your fingers stick to the metal. It's adjustable so that you can put it anywhere on the slider to balance with. It has a quick release at the front, which grabs the front and back of the mount. The shoulder mount for the shoulder has locks at the front and the back. When I moved to 1080p, I got one of these carbon fiber, lightweight, hang it by my little finger kind of things, and this is the plate for it. So this plate is going on a Manfrotto, like Sai said, and this is, I don't know, maybe 5-10 pounds. So it goes from 30 pounds to 5 pounds, and that's what will decide whether it's a standard. As soon as cameras are standard, mounts and tripods will catch up. But this mount here is all I use now, and it's very easy on my easy tripod.
Jesse?
Yeah, you choose a family and you buy into that family of tripod heads. We went with Manfrotto. There are other options.
Mitchell?
I have Sackler. Here's a Sackler Arca quick release panel sitting on my Kessler. One thing about Arcas too, be careful where you buy them. If you get knockoffs from some foreign country, they may not be machined to exact specs. They sometimes just don't work. And you don't want your camera on something that's not 100% in the proper position.
Courtney?
Yeah, in the prosumer space, Manfrotto probably has that best locked up. In the professional space for Aries and Panavision cameras, we mostly use the Sackler Touch and Goes, which is the touch and go release system, which has a small base plate that snaps into this female release capture plate that goes on top of the heads, and those will fit on most professional fluid heads or gear heads.
And Alex?
In broadcast, it's VCTs. The VCT is the one that everybody uses in broadcast.
Next question.
Morgan Price in Victoria, British Columbia, back again, says, do people use video follows audio in Mix Effect Pro? And how do you use it if you have an outboard audio chain?
Mitchell, real quick.
It might be a trick question. It's audio follows video, generally on your ATEMs. There's actually a button for that. And anything going into that is an outboard device, audio chain. So if you use it built in, when you click the video selection, the audio comes with it.
Next question.
Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois says, I'd like to use an Insta360 link camera in a production over 100 feet or more distance back to the switcher. What options are available for getting a USB-C connection converted over distance?
Guy, real quick.
Yeah, Video 360 has some long medical grade USB extension cables. There's also one, if you, I'll put a link in the chat that we got that was fiber for Tom's rack that was about 50 feet, and they had some longer ones. And then new at the show that I saw was J5 Create has a wireless webcam extender, 88 feet. So push the receiver a little bit further to get your extra 12 feet, and then you could wirelessly extend any webcam via this device that's coming out.
Oh, that looks so cool. Next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. Guy, is that the new version of the Accsoon SeeMo that was released last fall? Will it actually clamp on the back of an iPad or just an iPhone?
Guy? You're on mute.
Here's the new one right here, and it clamps onto the back of an iPad Pro. That's the new cage. And then it is not a new SeeMo, it's just a new cage. So you can see it there powering and giving the HDMI signal into the iPad. So that's that.
Awesome. Well, we are just about at the top of the hour, and we the next question. Sorry about that, Bill. Next question. My time was off. I need to get the atomic clock.
That's okay. I was wondering whether the Kiloshow stuff was up yet or not. So this one is, what are some good examples of shows using vmix titles and or graphics? That comes from Albie Lopez in San Antonio.
Alex?
Yeah, I think that one of the things we're looking at is having a second hour on vmix graphics specifically. So, and really talk about what it takes to get those graphics done and whether you use external data and lower thirds and so on and so forth. So stay tuned. I think we're going to try to bring in some vmix folks to talk about that very specifically.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, producers, for your questions. Know that those questions that we didn't get a chance to get to, that they've been sent back so that you can always resubmit them tomorrow or anytime this week. So now that we're at the top of our second hour, we're going to talk about the Kiloshow, the 1000th episode of Office Hours. And we have some of the fantastic crew that was a part of it. And we're really going to just spend some time now to walk through how did we put this all together, some of the lessons learned, and I'm super excited about this. Josh, can you kick us off for us?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Liberty. Yeah, it was fantastic being able to put on this show. And we hope to show a little bit about the behind the scenes and how we went about producing the show. And we have a lot of the folks, not all the folks, but we have a few of the folks here that were able to help us with it, because there was such a large amount of people that really jumped in and helped us with this production. Brian has a fantastic presentation that he's going to show. But before he does, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we got the planning started and how we really looked into the community to get their input for what kind of show that they wanted, since this is a show really not just about 1,000 shows, but it's about all of the community that really came along and evolved for all of those shows. So if we remember back in November, it started off a few months prior to the event, we started asking the community what they wanted. So we had a couple of planning shows. Some of us jumped on and asked the community, what type of show are you looking for? What do you want to see? And so it really gave us a lot of different ideas about what the community was interested about. And we even did a couple of them, even a follow-up about what we were planning. We took some of the ideas for the first one and carried it to the second one. We also looked into Discord. There is a vibrant discussion community about, tell us about your different ideas. What sorts of things should we include? And we took those ideas from the Discord and then put some of them into a voting category. So there were several things about, is this something that you want to see? Give us a thumbs up for it. Or different people wanting to contribute different videos. So we asked that. So we really wanted to see, since this was a story about the community, we wanted to get the community's input about, what kind of show they wanted. And so at some point, we had to buckle down, take the suggestions that were made, and start into production. And I think Brian can get really more into just how we went about making the production.
Thanks for even sharing that, Josh, of just the backstory of all those elements and all those pieces to get everyone, to get everyone's feedback, because there's some people that use the channel, some people that show up for the shows, and really bringing the community together. And Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Liberty. So as Josh said, we were planning really 2 to 3 months ahead of the actual show itself. And I've got a bit of a presentation just to take us through a quick overview of what went into the planning and the pre-production for the 1K show and some of the things that we've learned during the process. So how do you condense 999 daily episodes, community events, labs, technical infrastructure, and really just the whole history of office hours into one succinct package? And the 1K show was essentially a love letter to office hours, and it was designed to give panelists the opportunity to have deep, rich conversations, share stories about what office hours means to them. Throughout the show, we heard from OGs, from people who built the system from the ground up, and how this community has grown from strength to strength. Now, the 1K show was made possible because of the Office Hours 2.0 backend infrastructure and 300 odd days of working within that system, testing and refining the model. And we were able to take the learning from this and other remote productions such as NAMM, Cinegear and IBC and apply it to this show. So this was certainly an international production with a great crew of volunteers from around the globe, and each member of the core team was able to contribute their own expertise to the planning for this event. And as you can imagine, coordinating remote productions from across different time zones has its challenges. As part of the pre-production, we knew it was important to meet often and communicate with different department heads, keeping everyone up to date with progress. We learnt from previous events that if you're going to include video assets in a production, you need to get the editing team involved right from the start. And a huge thanks to our editors who worked right up to the show date on delivering video packages. And a special thanks to LucidLink, who again made it possible for us to work remotely. And it's definitely a great platform for large file sharing, especially between Canada and Australia. So 2 months prior to the event, we started planning, recruiting panelists, asking for topics, ideas, and video assets. We set up a Discord channel to communicate with the core team and the departments and use Google Docs to share planning information. And these are great apps for working with remote teams. Using the office hours infrastructure meant we could work with the back-end crew and the new 2.5 system. Our plan was to create a tight, complex production, more like a TV broadcast than a regular office hours show. And so we needed to extend it beyond the normal 2 hours. The 1K show was designed to be a kind of virtual campfire where panelists could tell their stories and experiences of office hours. And we wanted to include video contributions from community members, read out chat comments, and have live performances. So it was like having 3 second-hour shows back to back. To give the show some structure and include all the assets, we identified 3 broad themes: connection, community, and collaboration. And these themes informed each of the 3-hour blocks. Each hour was broken into 2 segments with their own tags and an expert panel group, and most topics had a discussion, chat comments, and a Q&A component. We had 43 panelists for the 1K show with a full gallery of 16 panelists in each hour. And a good example of back-end logistics was moving panelists on and off stage, and this involved communication between pre-show coordinators, the tech engineer, video playback, show caller, TD, panel liaison, anchor, and of course the panelists. We mapped out each queue of the runner show, and this helped to coordinate logistics between the back-end team and the anchor. And queues were communicated to the panel via Meccana and the panel liaison, and the runner show became the source of truth. It helped everyone stay on topic and keep to time. So rather than being restrictive, this structure really gave us flexibility to support the panelists and let the conversations happen. To finish up, some of the key takeaways from this show were: communicate clearly, whether it be on comms, on Discord, or in meetings. Being able to communicate your intent goes a long way to making a successful production. Be professional and respectful at all times. Look, we're a group of volunteers, and when someone gives up their time, don't waste it for them. And finally, deliver a great, minimal, viable product. It's good to be ambitious, but it doesn't matter if you can't be executed. And be realistic, plan effectively, and deliver the best show you can within your means. Finally, if you'd like to be part of a production, there are many roles that you can take on that don't require technical expertise. And if you have any experience with administration or planning, we would love to hear from you. We certainly need more admin staff, runners, researchers in the group. And being an understudy for a production is also another great way to get involved and learn about roles. So if you are interested, reach out to Josh or any of the team here, and I'll hand back over to the rest of the team.
Thank you so much for that, Brian. It was great to see just the timeline and all the elements that came into it, and really the reinforcing the themes that were presented and that represent the office hours community. Sky?
I called it the impossible show. And Brian, you really showed the choices and the decisions, and they were hard because, again, thousands of people, thousands of hours, how do you choose? And the creative direction that Josh says, I want to hear the story of this. He's very passionate about understanding the story, and of course I am too. So consequently, what shape and was it an elephant? Was it a duck? Was it an avocado? We had to make those choices. And at what point do those people get to participate, and how? And so that was a great recap, Brian. But I just think the impossible experience that this is, Alex, continues to expand. And again, thank you for your inspiration and creating a nutrient-rich environment that this could be possible.
Kristen?
Yeah, and you've just seen some building blocks which look maybe quite easy to handle on the presentation. But what it meant that we had these seven topics in 3 hours was that we added a lot of complexity on Mocana, which then is connected to our system where we as the TDs then are cutting the shows and so on. So it was just, it was really great to have the experienced teams and the part teams who have never worked this way together, but in different shows. And yeah, to work out the whole flow.
Awesome. Dave?
Yeah, we had 10 days of possible edit time when the submission window closed and the deadline arrived. Using Discord, we accepted those suggestions, as Josh pointed out, as well as some images for the ending collage, which worked pretty well for us. And yeah, reinforcing what Brian said about LucidLink, it works really well for all of us. It was able to allow live links to resolve in Final Cut, which meant that we could edit virtually from the cloud. And it also allowed anyone who built something like a lower third machine or a slate could share those elements between each of the editors. And that was a new thing for me because we didn't do that at IBC. We expected when we saw the list of suggestions, there were about 30 YouTube items that might have had to have been downloaded, and at 3 gigabytes a show, and then for us to scroll through shows to find the clips, we were looking at a lot of work. Adrian did yeoman service by going through the entire list of possible clips that accumulated up to December 9th and started downloading them into our raw materials folder on Lucid. He used a thing called ut.com, yout.com, which he already had a membership for. And this, most of us were expecting to use Downy or other downloadable tools, but he found that you could get just the clip. So the suggestions we were getting included the time in the show where that clip was, but we couldn't know where the ending was. So in UT.com, you can go to the ending of the clip and then just download that section. And so we weren't downloading the whole show. We also used some of the music came from Victor, and we were really appreciative that music was provided, and we didn't really have to have a lot of royalty-free stuff to search for. Having started with 30 possible items to edit, and over time we found through when the building of the run of show was, and Brian talked about how including the editors in the process from the beginning is a real good idea, because we didn't know when to start editing until that got locked. So the run of show went through, I think, 3 complete rewrites to bring it down to these themes and to make it more of a conversation show instead of just a playback show. And so when it was finished, the run of show had only about 10 items. And we only had to revise about 5 of these videos, which I claim is a victory for the editing posse, because we obviously understand the requirements and the vision for the show to be able to submit so many so close to finish. There were a number of silent video items to be used while the panel was discussing a subject, but it was just material to use just in case if there was room. And some of that was used and some other parts weren't. There were some issues renaming files before putting them in the hopper. Josh was running playback, and he and Brian worked out what the tag on the run of show was going to be, as opposed to what the previous tag's number was, which the editors were using. So we tried to keep up with that, and Kyle tried to keep us up to speed with that, but he couldn't be available all the time. So we had a little bit, 1 or 2 items just had to be renamed, even though the slate would say the previous name. The playback method was modeled on the IBC show, and our process might have benefited from a little more rehearsal and practice with the crew to get a flow going for the sequence of events that have to happen to switch to video and then come back out of video. So we hope future shows will incorporate some more practice time, and that we allocated enough for this show, but we might have just added a little bit more. We did have practice time with the TDs where they could hear the run of show walk through and give us an idea of what was going to happen when. I think, Liberty, you were part of that, and it was very helpful for you to organize your thoughts about how this show sequence was going to go. We were hoping Laura would be here today to talk about how Mukana was affected by this. And I can tell you, as part of the Mukana gang, it was a more hands-on than we've had in any other show. Mostly because, of course, 3 hours means you're going to have almost 3 crews. And we had a lot of people helping other people. And we even had spare people in case someone had to leave. So that's pretty much what we did in editing. And if others want to talk about how Mukana worked, that'd be helpful for me as well.
Thank you. Kenneth?
Well, I can add a moment or two about what happens beforehand. The job of the pre-show coordinators, the PSCs, is just to get all the who's in at the right whens and put them in the correct wheres. And that was easy enough to do. We had 3 different green rooms that helped us shuffle people around to make sure that they went where they were supposed to go. The checklists that were provided were absolutely critical for us. I was thinking of Olivier and his program on checklists beforehand. We made very good use of those. And we could have done it a little better. We think in review, the pathway to the stage could have been a little better. And I'm sure by the 2000 show, we'll have that down pat. If we do tech checks prior to moving the panelists into their green rooms, instead of interrupting a conversation in the green room to check a newly arrived panelist, I think that would have been a little smoother. The movement of panelists in and out could have been a little smoother as well, we think. And it would have been really helpful had we had a single designator on the names of the panelists, an alpha designator for the first group, a Bravo for the second, a Charlie for the third, that would allow us to recognize immediately who needed to leave and who needed to come back during that frenzy in between the hour breaks. I think that probably would have been the most help to us. And thanks very much to all the other PSCs, the pre-show coordinators who were with us that day. TJ and his hat, Greg and Kyle and Micah, and of course, Brandon, who was everywhere all at once. Well done.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
It's very interesting to see all the moving parts. I had a little bit of a 2,000 or 5,000 foot view of this because I was not working near as hard as all these people in the background. But the real tribute to an organization that puts together a program like this, which is as good as any TV program, is to be able to drop in the last 3 days as talent and immediately know where your position is, feel very comfortable, have all the information you need, all the cues you need to hear so that you can interact with what's going on. Of course, working with Liberty is a real pleasure. my job and Bill's job was to be the co-host and chat coordinators, or not coordinators, chat readers. And speaking of chat, that was something new. I've never had that before, where we actually incorporated what people were saying into the show, and it was a curated list. So I didn't have to look at it and decide, well, this might be good, this might be bad. It was a list that was already being built there, and all we had to do when we were called on to read it was to go look at it. So every tiny little bit was taken care of. And I worked in a lot of productions over the years. This is as good as any of them or better. And as talent, where you're just supposed to look good on the screen, the people behind you, all of the people that were working behind the scenes, were there to make you look good, and they did. And if there were any problems, I didn't see them, and I don't think our viewers did either. And that's a real mark of an excellent production.
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, and one of the things that we planned around was having a robust schedule of rehearsals and practices, and we really planned. We learned this lesson from some of the other previous shows that we had of having, what we could add at a certain point. Alex gave us some good guidelines about when we should start cutting off the content guideline. We did it about 10 days before, and we basically had our planning schedule planned around our final rehearsal. So having our final rehearsal fixed and making sure that we have everything in place, and of course nothing new about that, but just figuring out things. But then planning backwards for that, we really looked at getting the different parts of the show together, whether it was the video playout, so having those individual people handle those, having the individual teams have their own meetings and coordinating those, like the pre-show coordinators that Ken was able to represent there, was really critical in order to seeing this show come about. And of course, there's lots of things that we'd love to throw into it, but it was a way of us really having a sane check on what we could conceivably do and having the high quality that we expect on some of our shows.
Yeah, it was a fantastic experience. And I like also how Brian had shared, the buildup of all the past productions and events that helped us to get to this point where it was a little bit different. It was a span over 3 hours, panels moving in and out, but just even kudos to Laura, who could not be here today, but just even the detail of like meetings, there were pop-up meetings through Discord of like, hey, can you talk now? And talking through how Mukana would work. And the details of like just on my end being able to participate in those meetings, because it's not just showing up and talking on camera. There's really the understanding of how the mechanics works, because when you are in the midst of it, in the thick of it, there's so many moving pieces. And I like to use sports analogies, like if you're doing, suicide runs or practicing your dribble, when it comes game day, like you're moving automatically through. And, there was a part that I missed, but nobody knew that it was missed because the back end team was a well-oiled machine. So just being able to move things around quickly and having all those documents created so that, here's this lane where I can see all these notes. Our amazing, chat readers and anchors had all that data and all that information in front of them. And I just want to reinforce like just how much those details and the thought behind them and people being able to work on the fly to make that happen, to make it this well-oiled machine. Brian?
Yeah, look, I agree, Liberty. Being able to have the office hour infrastructure already there and the back-end team who work on this show daily was such a help in being able to deliver the kind of program that we wanted to deliver. And again, pre-production, it's sort of all about working out what you want to be able to do and what you can achieve in the time. So we start off with sort of a really high idea of what we want to have, but then it's about whittling it down and really trying to get it so that it's concise and it's going to work. But at the same time too, once we had that structure, we were able to have some flexibility throughout the show, and we could sort of move and change. And I know, speaking with you via Chad as panel liaison, and just giving you the updates when things were moving. It was quite fast on show day, but we felt that we had a really good understanding about what we wanted to try and achieve. And so we were able to be flexible on the day because of this pre-production and all the planning that goes in beforehand. And that's something that I'm learning more and more, that, it's all about the show, but it's also, to get to that, you have to really put in the hours and the time and make that worthwhile in the pre-production. And I think this group banded well together. We really had a common vision that got worked out right from the start. What we kind of knew what we wanted to do, but it was just how logistically to get there. And so by communicating all the time, by having those meetings with the different groups, we're actually able to get to a consensus, get everyone on the page, and then deliver the show.
And Dave?
I want to go back to Brian's point about having people who can admin is key to this. And I got to put a shout out to Laura, because she took on the role of getting everyone organized on comms and knowing who was going to be on panel, and as well, all the Mechana stuff at the same time. And we had terrific comms behavior. And we had a really quiet comms that allowed the showrunner to hear everything going on and not have to deal with off-camera stuff as much. And I credit Laura with working with Mickey and demanding people get listed on the comms before we even had our panel locked in, so that she could have that flexibility. And I think at rehearsal, we discovered we had one person still not lined up on comms, and that was helpful too. But, for administration purposes, I think that was really neat. One of the things I wanted to point out, and I was only just reminded of it listening to you guys talk, but we had added a moment in the show, which was requested somewhere in one of our meetings, that we show the gallery of people who are watching in the theater, the quiet theater. And we worked that out to be able to have a moment in the show where we could show that, and Brandon quite rightly set up a way that we could do that. And I thought it was a very interesting moment in the show for us to be able to say to those who were coming at us through Mechana or watching us do it on the quiet theater, that they're part of the show too. And that gallery isn't part of what we do with the 2.5, but we may in the future try and incorporate a few more of these sort of audience showbacks to who's actually participating in their own way.
That's a great reminder, just the interactive pieces that were added from chat reader to showcasing the community on that side. Great point there, Dave. Josh?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was thinking too, along with the ways that the show was yet another office hour show, and the ways that it was different. We tried to keep the format as close as possible where we could, having the same driven by Mechana questions and answers, where people could show up on the show. Even if we didn't see them in the gallery, we saw them because they were able to vote their questions up, and that was really what drove our place for the show. Of course, we had the sections in it for the show, just like we do for here, but also we opened things up a little wider, even into the chat. Like it was mentioned, we had an actual chat manager that originally was we thought about having a person that was their dedicated job, and then as we consolidated the number of spaces that we had for the panel, what we did is consolidate that job for the reader. So the reader either read the Mechana questions, or they read at certain sections different curated things from our chat manager. So Peter Belbin was able to take care of that for us. So we had something that was a little bit of new, little bit of experiment to see how that worked. I think it worked pretty well as far as having that avenue. Maybe not totally focusing on that, but making sure that when people showed up for this live event, they knew that there was a few ways and that they could get involved and really be a part of the show. So like we mentioned, we had a couple of new things. Of course, we had different playouts planned ahead of time. The media was something, content is either easy to watch or it's easy to produce. And I can say, vouching for our editors, that it was easy to watch because of the hard work that they put into it. So having that, having it bookend different things and having that enable our panel rotation, which is something we had never tried before. We started off very ambitious about having a bunch of crews move in to be able to change the panels, But then we looked at it and we looked at really the themes that we were trying to cover, and could we do this in a more simple way? So while we did do the panel rotations, we were able to start with a panel, so we didn't need to do any rotations there, and then rotate 2 other times. So we were able to get 3 full panels in that had representation from people that could cover all the different themes that we wanted to cover in the show. So Brian Shan really did a fantastic job of really eyeing up, making sure that those things were covered during those shows. But it still had that office hours flavor to it, but you could tell that, it was a little heavier about, we had more to cover, and there was a lot more that we were doing. And there were a few things we were experimenting, but we kind of pulled our elbows in a little bit just to make sure that it was something that would be watchable and something you'd want to go back and watch for afterwards. It was something that would live on afterwards. So that and the after hours preview that was mentioned were a few things that we sort of experimented, and not that we didn't practice or rehearse them, but were ways in which we could expand the show. What are things in which we might want to add to the show? So there was a few opportunities that we had to be able to pull some new novel things in.
And Sky.
Just, Josh, I'm so proud of you. Brother, you came in early days of the office hours space experiment and said, let's participate. And you'd done some things with Noah Sargent, and the fun of that was you chose to make choices. And I'm looking at what we're talking about now, and it looks so solid. But 4 months ago, it was just this amorphous, gaseous thing of an idea, and the only solid thing about it was there was a day. And that was going to be the 1,000th time that a thing was going to happen. But again, making all those choices was a discovery of what were the opportunities we had, what were the resources we had, and also how do we involve and engage as many humans as possible. And at that point, we had the whole day. So that was the office hours opportunity. The after hours opportunity was the conversation that could continue after the show. So this has just been it looks so solid now as we're looking back on it, but I just remember it's like we were discovering, we were developing, we were creating, and then finding the people that wanted to participate in that vision.
All right, Bill, let's get into these questions.
All right, first one comes from Douglas Carmichael, and he asked, did you ever have to take manual control over the infrastructure bypassing Universe and or Isadora?
Go ahead, Brian.
So working with a 2.5 system was really great for this production. And if you can imagine not being able to have all of that infrastructure and trying to do something like this, I just don't know how you would do it. So it was really robust and held up, but also being able to have the back-end team who work here daily, they just know this system. And I was coming in as a bit of an outsider myself because, I don't really work on the back end as much as a lot of the team, but we had sort of 20-something people working in the back end to make this production such a success. And so it shows that this is a really robust system. We've had 300 odd days from 2.0, and it held up. And really, this was testing the system beyond the day-to-day capabilities that we do, but we really were able to see that you can take something like this and really give it that extra lift. And it's got the potential, of course, to go beyond just our office hours community to something else as well.
Next question.
Next one comes from James Babbitt in San Diego. Excellent video clip, the 12 Days of Office Hours Christmas. Who created and recorded and edited this video, and how long did it take to produce?
Josh?
Well, I know that the video took a very long time to produce. I'll just show some of the credits so I don't speak out of canon as far as who's responsible, but you'll notice there the orchestration and video editing is Brian Anderson there. So I think that answers your question.
Bill?
Yeah, I have to tell you that the band experience for the Office Hours Band is starting back when the very first piece that they did. And I say they in this particular case because I had nothing to do with this last one. Dale Nebetta was actually the project manager for this. Brian Anderson created that video. But the people in the Office Hours Band, if you have ever been on the outside of music and really want to get a deep understanding of how excellent music is created and how teams come together to all contribute, this experience has been stunning. There is so much talent, not just in the band, the people that you see, but the people behind the scenes who sweat these little details, the arrangements, the playing, the revising. It's a master class in how a great piece of video music content is built. And I can't tell you how much joy I've derived from even being peripherally involved. Again, I had nothing to do with this one. I'm just talking about the people in this group. They are amazing.
Brian?
So when we were moving panel between each hour, we were playing videos over the top. And I mean, part of this, which was so great, was getting assets like that remotes clip to be able to play out, and the amount of work and effort that went into a clip like that just enhanced the overall production, I thought. So thank you again to the remotes.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. What specific comms changes were needed for this show versus the daily office hours model?
Kristen?
Yeah, we had an additional complete extra area for the comms for the 1K show, which were also having the channels we usually have, but also additional ones. And also the groups were reshaped, especially for that show. So things like we've done for IBC before and things like that.
And Brian?
Yeah, the ability to be able to have comms for a show like this, or really any of the productions we do, is really important. And again, thank you to Jim and for his work with contributing with the comms as well, but also being able to use comms and everyone being so professional when they're using it. And that's what Dave was talking about before, because it can get very complicated. So having that ability to be able to just talk clearly on comms, everyone's got their own channel. That was a great way to be able to communicate between the panel and the back-end team.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Sky Gleason in Seattle. Why was the Kiloshow only 3 hours?
Only. Josh?
Yeah, good question. So, we started out in those planning sessions that you talked about, asking people what they wanted to see and how we wanted to plan for it. And Alex, of course, gave his support. He took off for the day and he says, I'm ready. We can make this as long as it needs to be. And so we looked about what we could practically put into this session to be able to, what we wanted to stuff into it. And we started considering what our volunteers, since we were using the 2.0 system, or 2.5 now system, we wanted to consider, how long of shifts are we going to make for them? Because, one of the things that we've learned from doing previous shows, some of them we've had quite long shifts, and we've done shorter ones too. And we've noticed that, having a shorter show where you're able to get the quality in and be able to not overwork your volunteers means that you could probably have another show later. So instead of burning all of our volunteers, we decided what would be, reasonable for the amount of people that we had, that we could fit a reasonable time period. And so we kind of settled on this 3-hour time period. And we were comforted in the fact that even though we were commemorating 1,000 shows and, all of the things that you couldn't possibly, put into this commemoration, there was more about the Kiloshow day. And so a lot of the things that we had planned and things that fell on the editor's cutting room floor, we were able to continue even after our 3 hours of our show, to continue in after hours as planned, that we would continue this and pull forward. So that's sort of this is sort of how we ended up about what would be a good condensed show that you would want to go back and check it out and watch later, and not kill our volunteers.
Good point. Dave?
Well, I'm going to answer Sky's question with, we could have done 6 if Sky was going to take Liberty's seat and then, do the other 3 hours.
Right.
We had enough material for 6 hours. We also understood that we're taking a whole day out of people's lives, and that really 90 minutes at a time is a good cycle for people to pay attention to what we're doing. So there were lots Josh has outlined many of the considerations, but there were a lot of discussions about how long this should be. And it varied. It varied widely.
Guy?
Well, when I heard Alex had taken the day off, I was thinking, so Mickey's volunteering to run comms and JJ's going to keep pushing buttons. But so the concept of having an after hours, party or gathering afterwards was to be able to satisfy that, because we were also realized it's a global audience. And Brian, what time is it there in your world? It's different. It's just, I just put my wife off to work, but it's, you put your kids to bed 2 hours ago.
Almost. Yeah. It's what, 3:30
in the morning.
Yeah.
So yeah, these were considerations of again, the calculations of, was it a conversation? Was it a show? When was it a show? When was it a presentation? And so I love that Josh started so early that this development process could happen with this kind of a new concept.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, look, I mean, the show itself was 3 hours, and, we could take it also into after hours, but, a type of show like this, you want to have other activities or events as well that are tied in, that are adjacent to what's been the main show. And so there's really room for people who want to take on, other things as well. It might be even meeting up face to face, or just being able to use that online platform, that remote platform like we have to do these other events and have smaller mini productions.
And to just even going off, that's what I was thinking too, Brian. It's like we really hit a sweet spot with that 3 hours. You always want to stop just enough when it's good and not when you're going off the cliff. And then when people are looking back at the show, it was just too long. And as you shared, who knows what that next 1,000th show will look like with all the labs that we have going on, with the evolution of office hours, that there may be more, even a little bit more structured in that after party, or there could be global meetups that are happening during that. So it definitely makes room for those kinds of activities, because it's, while we anchor office hours on our 2 hours, there's so much more that goes on outside of the live broadcast. Jason?
It's no accident that no university in the world teaches a lecture that's longer than 3.5 hours. It's not about intelligence. It's simply because there is a limit to human attention, and after hours was so much fun after that show, Alex, with oh man, that was great. Minions crossing the Potomac was great.
And Dave?
The idea just popped up here in this conversation that maybe there should have been watch parties set up in different parts of the world where groups of people who are familiar with office hours would just get together and be part of the show that way.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, will you be distributing the excellent montages from the show that weren't broadcast?
Dave?
Oh, I certainly hope so. I don't know what the mechanism would be for putting those in some sort of server and or a section of YouTube for office hours global. So I'd like to both back in IBC, we had a lot of behind the scenes stuff, and that's never been shown. Some of it from NAMM, never been shown. Some of it's just silly, but other parts were really intriguing and showed how the show was made. But also just for the purposes of having material that was mostly developed, and even in our case, finished edits, but then later not made it to the show. Yeah, we should have an accommodation for that somewhere in our planning.
Next question.
Jesse Mills in the San Francisco Bay Area asks, were there other custom control UI platforms, and he notes Universe, considered? And if so, what else is out there?
Brian?
Well, I can't talk for the back-end crew, but the 2.5 system's been using Universe and Isadora, and that's fantastic, especially for the TDs. And I mean, it's a really simple interface, but it has a lot of functionality. But more importantly, within the pre-production, being able to use things like the Google Docs that you can customize, Google Sheets, that was really important. And I'd really like to see that improve more, that we've got something that we can share and improve. And there's been a document that's sort of gone through all of the different productions, I think, since sort of NAMM, and it's just got more refined and more refined over the time. And the last one from IBC influenced how we use documentation from this. So being able to have the customization in something like Google Sheets that works for us specifically, as opposed to relying on a commercial product to help with pre-production, show running, etc., just gives you more flexibility as well.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Douglas Carmichael. Once again, I liked seeing JJ and the back end crew at work. Have you thought of adding that to the occasional regular show?
Dave.
Oh, there's some considerations there regarding people in the back end. Some of them don't want to be seen. They like being in the back end. Some people just like being the crew, and they're really happy back there. But if you put them on camera, they're not happy. And also, there's a different behavior. When you're on camera, you have to behave a little differently. And you can't, slouch in your chair and sit in the dark and all the rest that some of our crew do. So it's not that they can't do it, it's that they might not prefer to do it. And we're very concerned about having our volunteers be comfortable and just be known for their skills. So we encourage anybody to be on the panel at any time. And there's a lot of expertise back there, as you're pointing out, who might contribute to our regular shows. But you really have to take into consideration if the person just doesn't want to.
Kirsten?
Yeah, as one of the back-end crew person, I can maybe talk to this as I'm the first time on the panel today, and I'm usually more in the technical director role, or I'm in the question manager or other roles in the back-end. So it's quite different, I can say, because when you're cutting the show, then you listen and you watch very specific things which are important to really have the great cut and all things. And also when you're a question manager, you're focused on other things. So it's not really the main thing to be on camera there. It's more to produce the best show we can. So, and some of us are shy, that's right.
But we're so happy that you are here, because this goes to show just the learnings that happen. Like, I'm happy I get privy to that in Discord in the meetings, but just the opportunities there are to be a part of the back end and how you can learn and grow. And the understudy, I know that Gudrun was also understudy, and to see all the faces that make office hours happen. So happy that you are here. Next question.
Kirsten, don't be a stranger. Paul Terry Wallace up next. Brian, did this change your concept of show running?
Brian.
Yeah, so obviously the role of the showrunner is both someone who's creative and also managerial. And there was actually in the core team, we sort of, Josh and Sky, myself and Dave and Laura even were contributing to really the run of show, but ultimately I came in a little bit later and took a lot of the ideas and just sort of organised them. But it was everyone's contribution to what they wanted to put in. And my own background, I produce online training, educational training content, and being able to sort of use all of those skills was important. But it was more about working with shows like IBC. So working with a team like Mickey and Jonas and Richard, and actually working from the start, where I started off as the note taker in the meetings, and I just learnt and watched them and saw that production from start to finish. And so it was that experience more than anything else that really helped me shape how to approach going into this show.
Sky?
And because you had not been a part of the creative process at the very beginning, you were able to be a little more, I don't want to say the word brutal, accurate, articulate. And also once we determined it was a 3-hour box that we had to fit 1,000, concepts into, you were very gracious in listening to the input of, we really should have this piece of element in there. And you were able to find, if a second ask was asked to put something in, you found a place for it, but you were also very articulate in understanding, it's only 3 hours. And so we got to figure out how to squeeze this into that shape. So again, Brian, thank you.
Yes, I co-signed that. Thank you. I think I said this in the after hours on the Kilo day, but as the question that was asked in the first hour by Paul Wallace of like defining the showrunner, and you coming in as the person who kind of put all the pieces together in the continuity, that helped me tremendously to be able to, as much as I was in meetings and prepping for hosting, but to then really be able to, like, we spent an hour, you said your doors open, we spent an hour going line by line through the show, the run of show, and to really be able, like, you were able to give context to why things were happening, which then therein helped me to be able to really bring the community and the audience through the experience. So it's pre-production is paramount, but then having someone who can bring all of that together for the technical side and then for talent side, it's like, it was just fantastic. So thank you for that, Brian.
Yeah, I think you really just, at the end of the day, you have to make a decision, and it could be good or bad, but ultimately, I think if you own that decision and you're willing to see it through, it's going to be of benefit in the end. And I think ultimately we had a great production. I mean, I was really proud of both the show, but also the team and the back-end team and the panelists. And I mean, it was an opportunity to hear some of the lore from office hours. And really, we were there to support the panelists have those really great conversations. So ultimately, everything was about supporting the panelists and making a great show.
Next question.
Next one comes from Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh. What do you imagine we'll be reviewing for our 2000th show? Labs, special shows, guests, and community?
Sky?
Well, again, since we've achieved the impossible, can you be more impossibler? I don't know. But I think somehow AI is going to be a part of this. I think the exponential opportunity that doing something on a consistent daily basis, we are kind of ahead of ourselves. So if we continue that exponential curve in 2000 shows, Alex, I'd love to see what you think in your crystal ball, because you're always the 2 fences ahead of me.
2 light years ahead. Brian?
Midjourney, Descript, and ChatGPT.
Good call there, Alex.
I think that 2.5 years is a long time, so or 3 years is a long time. So I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunity to get hopefully a lot done in the next 2,000 episodes. I think that what I really like listening to all of this is the idea. I think in 2.5 years, I think we'll be at a size where watch parties and get-togethers, and we may not be able to do it on a Friday because we have to do it on a Saturday or a Sunday, just because we just have to, make it a day, and we get together. I mean, I think that there is this, and we talk a lot about being digital, but I think it's a lot of fun. I think a lot of us look forward to like running into each other, when we're there. And so I think that finding ways that we can have, we're going to talk about this on Friday, but like a digital first event that is really, it's not a digital event like we did on this one, but we have spaces and we have people, and people are getting together, and there's a mixture of people watching, and we're still presenting digitally, but there's a lot of opportunities for us to get together. I think that if we're successful, we'll be doing a lot more where we're doing things in the world and then but being connected. So not just sitting here in our studios. You're going to see us over the next 2 years looking for things where we're doing things together, but connected over Zoom or whatever we're using there to make that happen. And so I think that that's going to be a really interesting puzzle that we'll be looking back on.
Next question.
Kirsten Osterkamp here on the panel from Germany says, what of this kind of a new concept from the 1K show could partly be used in other second hours and or in other office hours productions?
Dave?
I think part of this has been discussed actually on Sundays with Alex, where he imagines that we'll have some sort of editing capacity to support the show, that we build up a crew of volunteers who will take on projects that we know are coming a week ahead, work with the people, and maybe have other materials brought into the show and have a way of having controlled playback, or as we're doing today, side-by-side screens where the person's talking about something, and just being able to make a more rich media environment out of it rather than a face-to-face. The face-to-face and the community building and all that doesn't have to be sacrificed there. It's just for some of the enhancements to make it a more compelling presentation for clearer understanding.
Josh?
Yeah, what Dave touched on there about the media was kind of what I was thinking too. So we did have some media play out that really was prepared ahead of time, and we had our play out there for the show. And having that, intentional content, I think, aided the story. But also, we tried new things like having the chat reader too and chat manager. So different things that we could use to look at different aspects of the show, give people different ways of contributing and having that global community where no one's left out.
Brian?
Yeah, look, I think this model where, we're working with pre-production as well, and we're able to actually, spin up a really good production that's quite tight, a bit more like a TV broadcast, bit more produced maybe, but being able to actually show others and take that outside the office hours current venue where other people can use that. So people who are interested, who are looking in and thinking, is this possible? And I think, there's many people in our community, who do this for a living, but also being able to work with a volunteer group who, can put in some time and then sort of disperse and come back when needed. I think that'd be really great to see.
And Sky?
I just think OH Productions has a nice ring. It's got a nice, I can see the logo already. I'm going to go into Midjourney and find it.
Dave?
I guess for Kirsten's benefit, I guess we should keep our eyes on the next 2.5 years of what kind of group productions are done, community-led productions. We're certainly looking at going back to conventions and outside events, but there may be others, not just space all the time, but some others like air shows or some of the other museum tour things and all those suggestions that have been brought out in the past.
Next question.
Paul Terry Wallace in Austin, Texas. What role did Discord play in the 1000th show?
Josh?
Well, I spoke about it a little bit, the way that we organized in asking our community and getting feedback from the community using Discord with the discussion channel and also with our voting channel, right? But there was some other ones that weren't public facing that we used Discord for as well. There's one that we used for our planning committee. So all the people on the crew had access to our full planning committee, and they actually had their own independent crew thing. So the people that handled the back end of the system had their own specific Discord, but then we had sort of a general session of planning for a full Discord meeting. Also, what was a nice thing to do, it kind of reminded me of the last question though, being that we already knew the panelists, we already knew who they were coming in, we could prepare them ahead of time. So we actually had their own Discord channels for each of the panelists where they came in and they could see, who they would be talking with and what part of the story that they would be covering. So we were able to organize them, plus give them instruction about, what was their call times and when they could be pulled into the meetings. So Discord had a wide view. We really leaned on it pretty hard for not just the public facing, but also for planning and preparation and for some nuanced things as well.
Next question.
Michelle in Wilmington, Delaware, here on the panel, just would like to comment that Liberty is a superior talent as host of all things office hours, and he'd work with her anytime, he says.
Thank you, Mitchell. Jason?
Yeah, +1 on that. Alex, you've got an excellent eye for talent. At first, I thought, who is this person Mondays? Like, I barely saw her, and now she's hosting on Mondays. But, yep, good eye, and Liberty, you're it.
100%.
Thank you, Mitchell.
I agree. Liberty, you're inclusive. That's the best word to explain what I liked the most about you. Include everybody. And that certainly hits right on to our mission statement here, not to leave anybody behind. So congratulations on being such a great... You might be better than Alex is.
I've already said that. Said that.
Well, I didn't. So there you go.
Thank you. And this is, I got a message too, just at the turn of the new year that similarly, like, who is this person? And so I think it also goes back to Alex of just, having an eye and an ear. And I'm saying this also to encourage those of you who are producers and want to get involved, because it was in after hours that I think was after a show in 2020. I think it was, or 2021 at the top of the year, where I said, okay, I'm going to be on camera, not just, in the chat. And that was the impetus to be heard, to be seen, and things that hosting has always been the side part. The production part has always been the main thing. And then this is like, oh, wait, it's topsy-turvy now. So there are some gifts and skills that you have that they're there. You've used them passively, but maybe it's time for them to come out. So that's just my plug there. Brian?
Look, I just want to say thank you very much, Liberty, for the role that you had as the anchor for the 1K show. And I think anyone who was looking at the runner show on the back end would have been daunted. But, as always, you were just graceful and professional. And you did an amazing job. And also to Bill and Mitch, as well as the co-anchors, you guys were great. It was just a fantastic team all around.
Awesome team. Josh?
I just want to say that it was a bit of fortuitous nature that the 1000 show happened on a Monday. So, of course, Liberty had no choice. She had to be our host, our anchor for that.
I like that, Bill.
One of the oldest saws in the business is if you want to look good, work with people who make you better. And that is exactly why I was happy to see Liberty in that seat. She makes everyone works around her look better constantly. It is a rare gift.
Thank you both. Thank you. Next question.
Paul Terry Wallace, Austin, Texas. Now that the show is over, what did you learn that would improve another upcoming show of this scale and size?
Brian?
Look, I mean, these productions are all about learning, and they're all about making mistakes just as much as getting the job done. And I don't know anywhere else where you can have the opportunity to come in as a volunteer who's got no professional experience, be asked just to step up and have a go, be able to fail and it's okay, and then be supported, and then be asked to do it all again at a higher role. And I mean, personally, I've gone from being a TD to a show caller to a showrunner in over a year, and I've just loved every moment of it because of the office hours community and how friendly and engaged and just willing for you to step up and take a role. And so, thank you to the community for the opportunities that I get from these shows.
Dave?
Well, the question's about what I learned and would take to a future show. And I think what we saw Mukana do for us and the new roles that are starting to emerge that will support Mukana, and of course the future of 3.0 is going to make it probably more possible for participation in the future. And we're getting there slowly in increments. And at some point, we're going to be able to have people submit material almost in real time.
Good point. Sky?
Well, consistencies that I'm seeing are department heads are invaluable, and then those decision makers, but also that, as Alex has rephrased, the long runway is if you are going to do things with volunteers to give yourself plenty of time. I love that, again, Josh engaged the community and says, what do you want to participate? How do you want to participate? What do you think you want to see? And so those hard creative choices in the early stage, and then we got to get it done, and it's going to take this resource and or that human to make it happen, and giving that enough time as well. So again, making choices about what it is and what it is not is also critical in, didn't do a lot of experimenting with this show. We did a couple of things, but we decided this wasn't going to be that experience. It needed to be a pretty tight run experience. So the experimenting during the show, at least, was kept to a minimum for this experience.
Josh?
And I'll answer one of the things that Paul didn't answer, asking about, improve the scale and size. Proven the frequency. Not that we're going to have 1,000 shows more often. Well, who knows? Maybe we will. But that we could do these shows. This is only possible because we had done NAB and Cinegear and NAM. Everyone seems to forget about NAB, but yes, all of the other shows. We learned from each of those and then carrying our ball a little bit forward. And then we had a little more in the tank after each of those events, after learning what each of us could do, what our capabilities were. And then as we did, one of the things that IBC really did well is have the understudy roles, so that more people, we widened our base as there were more people we could look to do really critical roles. And so when we were looking for show leads, people would step up, and having people to fulfill those roles meant that we could have a wider scope, and also gave us a little bit of a different vision. So at some point, we did definitely ask the community about what kind of show that they wanted. But after we took those suggestions and pulled them in, a lot of those decisions then became internal ones, where we were looking at what our capabilities were, how many people were there in order to take care of certain things. And that determined, ultimately how far we were able to go and, what we were able to do with things. So having more people accomplished with that, it wasn't easy. We'll say that it wasn't an easy lift, but for what we were able to do and the amount of lift that it was made possible and easier by the previous things that we had done in the past. So it'll just get easier when we do some of the different shows to learn from them and have an understanding and have a larger base of people that can take care on these different roles.
And Alex.
Well, thank you, everybody, for such an amazing work. There's just so much lifting. I mean, it's just it just really is amazing what we're doing here. And amazing that people really stand up and start doing things that are just crazy. And we take on crazy things all the time. And I just want to thank, obviously Josh and Liberty and everyone else in the back end. I can't list everybody because it's just Brian and Brandon and everyone else that had put so much work into this. And I really will say that the secret to the operation is to jump on these teams. So I mean we're going to be doing more and more team building over the next year. In Pixel Core, we had 27 teams that ran year round, and they had, it was 200 and some people that were working all the time on things. I chose this time to start backwards, which is in Pixel Core, we just started putting people into positions. They just started going. And this time I wanted to have people kind of come out of a general, membership or a general group of people that were working together. And that's what we're doing right now. And people are just showing up. And there's not many places in the world where you get to just say, I volunteer to do something, and then get to have that responsibility and slowly build that up and have a place that you can fail. It's obviously we do everything we can not to fail. And the team definitely did an amazing job here. But the main thing is that you don't get that opportunity very often. That's part of why we're here, is to give people the opportunity not just to have a conversation, have their answers questioned and questions answered, and not just to learn how to have a great thing here, but for us to be working on things together, because that's the best way to network. It's the best way to know what other people will do, is not what their business card looks like, or whether they can drink you under at the bar, or whether they'll buy meals, but what are they like in the trenches? What are they like when there's a deadline? What are they like when when things need to get done? How, that's when you know who people are, and you don't usually get to do that where it's a it's a sandbox that's relatively safe, and I think that I would highly recommend this group of people building this stuff is about to get a lot bigger. I would highly recommend getting into these as early as you can if you have the time, and you're trying to break in. This is a great way to get those reps in, get the hours in that you need, because the work hours are more important than anything else in this industry. Like how many hours you actually, were working on this and working, and doing it by yourself is great, but doing it with, how often do you get to work with a team like this, like a bunch of great people all over the world, figuring out the future of production, because we're creating this future together. So I just want to first take my hat off to everyone who worked on this and that makes this possible. But I also want to invite everybody to keep on jumping on these teams and taking on those roles, because the more of us that put in a little bit of time to make this all work, sometimes a lot of time, but a little bit of time to make this work. But the more people that start to shoulder this, the more we start building a future that all of us get to step into together. So anyway, just thank you again to the team that put this together. Just amazing, amazing, amazing work, and can't wait to see the next one.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you to our producers for all of your amazing questions, to our panelists, and also our Kiloshow backend people that joined us today. Thank you. We hope to see you in future shows as well. And to our backend team, for without which this would not be possible. Tomorrow, we've got getting creative with Canva and Keynote with David Paskin for a second hour. So stay for after hours, come back tomorrow as well. And you want to learn more, head over to officehours.global and we will see you soon. Bye. Yay. Great job, everyone.
Got to see the iceberg underneath the water. That was amazing. Great presentation, Brian. Thanks.
It's always bigger under the surface.
So big. Huge.
That's 77,307 miles. The luck traversal. Wow.
Got to 700 million bananas.
It's a lot of bananas.
So many. It's a bunch.
September 14th. Sunday, September 14th, 2025. Kiloshow 2K show.
Sunday.